As Donald Trump actively increases his authoritarian actions and keeps talking about how the people want a dictator, we have a disturbing and shocking new polling analysis that reveals this is much more dangerous than you might think. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, just real quick to remind you, in addition to deploying the National Guard in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., and California in general over the objection of governors and local leaders, this is what Donald Trump keeps saying in the past 48 to 72 hours.
Unbelievable job. Thank you very much. But then he goes on television and says, "Oh, Trump is a dictator. He's a dictator." And a lot of people have so the line is that I'm a dictator, but I stop crime. So a lot of people say, if that's the case, I'd rather have a dictator.
So Trump keeps saying stuff like this. Remember, he campaigned on "I'll be a dictator for a day" in 2024. Then after he won, he kind of dropped it, although he, I would argue, acted in increasingly over authoritarian ways. Now he's blown the dust off the word dictator with respect to his rhetoric. So now, first it was rhetoric, which was bad enough. Then it was action. And now he's pairing both rhetoric and action, words and action. And now we have a disturbing new polling analysis, which is making this so much worse because in addition to the most powerful man in the world, clearly adopting the rhetoric and actions of a wannabe dictator, he's increasingly finding support among Republicans. Trump says many people might want a dictator. Yes, many of his people. This is a CNN analysis by Aaron Blake. Donald Trump on Monday denied that he aspires to be a dictator, but at the same time, he decided to make a related point that lots of people actually seem to want a dictator. Quote, and they say, he's a dictator, Trump said of his critics. Quote, a lot of people are saying, maybe we like a dictator. I don't like a dictator. I'm not a dictator. Why did Trump add this addendum? Maybe he's being provocative, or maybe the guy who has repeatedly suggested he should have absolute power and gone to great lengths to expand his power is planting a seed that it might be a good thing, even a popular thing. Who can say? What we can say, though, is that Trump is more or less right. Many people are increasingly entertaining the idea of a dictator. They are his supporters. They don't necessarily say, yes, I want a dictator, but polling shows Republicans have edged in that direction to a pretty remarkable degree. And that's allowed Trump to keep poking and prodding for a broad new grant of presidential authorities with little pushback from a base that once prided itself on limited government and federalism. And that, as dangerous as this is, that part right there makes it disgusting. I would argue just clamoring for a dictatorship in general, regardless of your purported principles, is disgusting. But what the MAGA base is doing now is even more disgusting because it adds the hypocrisy to it. Perhaps the most startling poll came last year. A University of Massachusetts Amherst survey asked about Trump's comment that he wanted to be a dictator, but only for a day. Trump said it was a joke, but 74% of Republicans endorsed the idea. Okay, that was only for a day. That's a pretty limited form of dictatorship, and maybe some people felt they were getting in on the joke by endorsing it to a pollster. I'll also point out real quick that most dictators who want to be dictator for a day want to keep being a dictator, despite what they may say. Remember, again, I invoke Star Wars a lot because I'm a Star Wars geek, but maybe taking it out of the realm of real world history and making it a bit more abstract, like entertainment, might make it easier to digest. But do you remember in the Star Wars prequels, Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, where Supreme Chancellor Palpatine is given emergency powers, and he's like, I love democracy, I love the Republic. The power you give me, I will lay down once the crisis has abated. And of course, that never happened. Spoiler alert, he would later go on to declare himself Emperor of the Galaxy and rule as a tyrant for 20 years. Spoiler alert. The point being, though, that though people who want this shit say, it's only for a limited time, they tend not to see it that way. They try to drag it out in perpetuity. I digress. But there's plenty more where that came from. When you ask such questions in more nuanced ways, you find that the Trump GOP is increasingly authoritarian and curious, at the very least. Polls generally show more than half of Republicans say they want fewer checks on Trump's power, and upwards of 1/3 endorse some version of unchecked power. Let's start with that poll first, or that first part. A Pew Research Center poll early this year showed 59% of Republicans and Republican-leaning independents agreed that many of the country's problems could be better solved, quote, if Donald Trump didn't have to worry so much about Congress and the courts. I repeat, if Donald Trump, the president, one branch of government, didn't have to worry so much about these minor details like the legislature and the judiciary. But that's a larger number. That's a larger number than two polls that asked a similar question last year, but all showed a majority of Republicans endorsing the sentiment. The number in the Pew poll spiked to 78% among Republicans who identified with the GOP strongly. Saying Trump should face fewer hurdles, of course, isn't the same as saying he should be a dictator. But when you dig a little deeper, you'll find a significant number of Republicans endorsing that kind of power, as many as 3 or 4 in 10. Some of the most striking findings on this: 44% of Republicans said the court shouldn't even be allowed to review Trump's policies, according to a CBS News YouGov poll earlier this year. I repeat, 44%, nearly half of Republicans say the court shouldn't even be able to question Trump. Really? Imagine, what would those same 44% of Republicans have said if you swapped the name out from Trump to Biden? Bet they would have said something different. Again, despicable, period. But when you add that hypocrisy, like, no, we want our guy. Presidential power sucks if it's a Democrat. If it's a Republican, they should be able to do whatever they want. Pathetic. 28% of Republicans said a president should be able to ignore Congress or the Supreme Court when those institutions, quote, hold our country back. A PRRI poll around the same time showed. 36% of Republicans said they wouldn't be at all bothered if Trump were to, quote, suspend some laws and constitutional provisions to go after political enemies. A Monmouth University poll in December showed. Just 23% said they would be, quote, bothered a lot by this. The rest were in the middle. So more Republicans than not said they wouldn't be bothered at all if Trump were to suspend the Constitution to screw over his political opponents. Holy shit. But wait, there's more. 28% of Republicans said the country needed a president who was, quote, willing to break some rules and laws to set things right, per a late 2023 Fox News poll. 24% of Republicans said ahead of the 2024 election that if Trump lost, he should, quote, do whatever it takes to take power, according to another PRRI poll. So before Trump won the election in 2024, 1/4 of Republicans said he needs to do whatever the fuck he has to take power. Holy shit. So to sum up, around 1/4 of Republicans or more have endorsed the idea of Trump seizing power, breaking laws, and violating the Constitution when necessary, and being completely unchecked by Congress and the courts. And to be clear, this isn't just a matter of lots of people not understanding the concept of checks and balances. When pollsters have asked these kinds of questions broadly about presidents and not Trump, Democrats have been significantly less likely than Republicans to embrace these ideas. Here you go. This is the key part. And this is why I say the Republican Party is largely an authoritarian cult of personality, which does not deserve to have power. They should lose every friggin' election. That's why. The Democratic Party has its faults, both the politicians and the base. I want to make that very clear. And quite frankly, I don't trust the Democratic politicians or the base with unlimited power either. We don't deserve the sort of power that Republicans want to give Trump. I'm not saying just don't give it to Trump. I'm saying none of us deserve it. It's a metaphorical weapon that none of us should have in our hands. That's how I feel. That's how I felt about the presidential immunity decision. See, I'm consistent, and I know most of you are consistent enough that when Joe Biden was president and that decision came down, we weren't like, oh, hell yeah. Good. That means Joe Biden can crush the Republican Supreme Court and the Republican senators. He can round them all up and jail them for life. And no, we didn't say that. We were like, that's scary. No president, Democrat or Republican, Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Barack Obama or Bill Clinton or George Bush or whomever deserves that level of immunity and unaccountability. That's really dangerous. But Republicans cheered when that decision came down, even though Biden was the one in power and Trump wasn't. Biden was the most powerful man on earth, not Trump. Biden was the one in charge of the military, not Trump. Biden was in charge of the FBI, not Trump. But they knew in their hearts, even Republican voters, that as much shit as they talked about Biden being a dictator, they didn't actually believe it. They knew on some level, like, actually, we don't have to worry about that level of power and unaccountability in the Democratic Party They won't use it against us the way we are so horny for Trump to use it against them. Because if they had been, they would have been terrified that Joe Biden and the deep state have that presidential immunity now, and they're going to be in power for at least 6 months. They would be terrified. They'd be like, oh my God, this is a disaster. Now we're at Biden's mercy. They didn't feel that way. What this shows is something very similar, that Democrats do not believe that presidents should have that level of power. And by the way, I'll also note when it came to Trump immunity, that when Republicans were asked about presidential immunity, generally speaking, you still had a lot, but more Republicans than not opposed presidential immunity when asked about presidents in general. But when you ask that same question and swap the word president with President Trump or Trump, then a majority of Republicans supported presidential immunity. Isn't that funny how that works? Again, no principle whatsoever. And unfortunately, it's not just with the Republican politicians. Many Republican voters, many Republican citizens don't have a principled view of power. It's all about owning the libs and elevating Trump. Very dangerous. So where does that leave us with Trump's new comments? They help us explain why Republicans don't push back on Trump's power grabs. In that way, Trump is pointing to a very real phenomenon. But it's also not ridiculous to think Trump might be pointing to support for dictators for a very specific reason, to legitimize his power grabs. Trump often uses the many people are saying construct to promote ideas he likes, after all. If many people more or less want a dictator, maybe it's not so extreme for him to be asking for more unchecked power. It's also worth noting the context in which Trump is lodging this. There's a growing argument in more extreme portions of the right that the country is marching inexorably towards a more authoritarian brand of government. See Tucker Carlson last week. To the extent that people embrace that idea, it's not a big logical leap to think your side should do the authoritarianism before the other side can. We'll see if Trump keeps fertilizing the seed he's planted. All of the above shows how much that's worth paying attention to. So, not good, folks. Disturbing, shocking new polling analysis. And again, I'm relieved that at the very least, despite all the faults of the Democratic Party, we have a more principled objection to unlimited power and to tyranny and to dictatorships, even when it's in our hands. But Donald Trump alone saying the shit would be bad. Donald Trump alone doing the stuff would be bad. Donald Trump saying and doing these things together is even worse than that. But what makes that even worse is Donald Trump saying it, doing it, and having an increasing level of support among millions of Americans in the Republican Party to do it. That's really, really alarming. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.